Hello, and welcome to this Global Thought Leadership Institute special webinar on bridging the gap between thought leadership producers and sales teams. We're going to be looking at how to maximize engagement across your entire organization so that activation leads to optimal impact. I'm Katharine Rooney, Editorial Director at Phronesis Partners, and we're lucky enough to have with us today two GTLI board members who are ideally placed to contribute to this discussion. We have Cindy Anderson, CMO and Global Lead for Engagement and Eminence at IBM's Institute for Business Value, and the co-author of a timely recent book, The ROI of Thought Leadership. Jeff Potter is Managing Director and Lead of Advisory Insights at KPMG. We also have executive advisor and consultant Maria Boulden, who's held senior sales roles at organizations like Gartner and DuPont. Thank you all of you for being here today, and thank you to our audience for attending. Let's get started. So, Cindy, I'd like to start with you. We've spoken before about how effective it is to have your whole organization involved in the activation of thought leadership. I'm wondering why that's so important and what some of the challenges are in making that happen.
Yeah, great question, Katharine, and thanks so much for having me and Jeff and Maria here today. This is a topic that's really close to my heart for many reasons, not least of which we have a lead of the IBM Institute for Business Value right now who's very thorough belief is that thought leadership is only 50% producing content and it's 50% promoting content. And what that means is that you have to activate your whole team around you. And in fact, I just wrote a LinkedIn article on Sunday about this very topic because I saw it in action at one of the events that we have this week where there was a little bit the virtuous cycle of thought leadership. So from the production, we just launched our annual CEO study. And we also just had our biggest event last week, and they happened at the same time, and we launched the study at this event. And having the marketing team, having the comms team, the PR folks, and the thought leadership team all aligned around using this study as the content engine and the data from the study as the kind of provocation to get people talking in sessions and in roundtables and in the forum, the exhibit hall, really made a difference and aligned people around this anchor content in a way that had we not had it, would the event have been successful? Absolutely. But it really made it, much more focused on the business challenges that executives are facing. So it helped people take away messages from the event and actions that they could use very specifically around some of the challenges. It happens to be a focus quite a bit on agentic AI, which probably most of the content will be for the near future. But the follow-up now beyond this will also revolve around, keeping people engaged with that content, with that data, with those topics. And I think that serves to really keep IBM in the minds of our buyers at the point where they're ready to make a purchase. So again, the virtuous cycle of having the team aligned around a particular piece of content at a particular time, and really making that an ecosystem of support. I think it really makes the difference in it makes the production of thought leadership just all the more valuable for the organization, that's producing it.
Mm-hmm. And what about some of the challenges in doing that? We do often hear that there is a bit of a disconnect. How do you, what are those challenges and how do you get around them?
Yeah, the challenges I think can be on a couple of sides. I mentioned 50% of thought leadership producers' time should be producing and 50% should be promoting. We all know that as content producers, we really like to make stuff. We're not so excited about getting out there and really making sure that people are using it. So that's a challenge, and I've seen that in multiple organizations where I've worked. So getting people aligned around making sure that that thought leadership doesn't end with the production of content is a challenge. That the same thing applies with our marketing colleagues. They are very interested in producing stuff. Everybody likes to make stuff, right? And it's much harder to get people interested in it and to get people to use it and to get people to value it than it is to create it, because obviously you're in control of the creation. You're not so much in control of getting people to use it. So those are the challenges. The ways around it are really trying to demonstrate the value that a piece of thought leadership delivers. And how we do that at IBM and with the IBM Institute for Business Value Content is really around measuring, let's call it pipeline impact. Your pipeline could be anything. It could be revenue, it could be, opportunity, it could be whatever. But we look at clients who have interacted with our thought leadership in some way or another and their pipeline. And then we look at a comparable set of clients that have not interacted with our thought leadership in any way, and we compare the pipeline. And in one specific instance around chief supply chain officers, we see a 5 times greater impact with clients who have interacted with our thought leadership. That's meaningful to a marketing team. That's meaningful to a salesperson. It's meaningful to an account representative. And when you tell them that they may be able to use thought leadership to build their pipeline that way, then it becomes real to them. So I think whatever way you measure, and I know Maria and Jeff will talk more about this, but whatever way you measure the impact of your thought leadership on your client base, that has to get in front of the people who can use it in a way that helps them understand the value of it.
Great, thank you. I know, Maria, this is a conversation that you've had with various colleagues and at various events about that kind of disconnect. I think you call it the stovepipe effect, that there's this kind of siloing within organizations where the different teams are separated. And in fact, there's an Edelman study from last year that shows 1/3 of thought leadership producers say their organization doesn't really know how to use thought leadership as a sales or marketing tool. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, Maria, about that stovepipe and what the solution to that might be.
Maria, you're muted.
My husband would love to find that button. I couldn't agree more with what Cindy shared. I think it was a brilliant response, especially being data-driven as you approach salespeople. Contrary to perhaps popular belief that sales is charm and communication skills. Hopefully no one thinks that anymore, but it's been a kind of a brand that sales has had to shake. And the primary way to do that is to hire salespeople that execute based on data and science, because that's what we need. The primary source of the disconnect is a company not understanding the customer journey through the entire customer life cycle. Because a company that understands that knows how to align their functional teams, and everyone knows their role in landing and keeping that customer from the first digital instance to repeat sales. So thought leadership producers may know their role and their part of the customer journey, but if they can't translate that to sellers in a way that helps them understand how it affects the seller's role and the part of the customer journey where they engage, then sellers won't know how to use it. And unfortunately, you can't just lob it over the fence. Not that anyone's doing that, but you can't just lob it over the fence, especially in an environment where 72% of sellers feel overwhelmed by the number of skills they need to master just to do their jobs. Agentic AI, pick your buzzword, but there's a lot of things being thrown at them today as companies digitally transform themselves. And it's just going to go in the pile of other things that overwhelms them if they don't understand that. The customer journey map exercise itself, most people look like a deer in the headlights. It's not rocket science. It isn't expensive, and it doesn't take weeks to create. And yet most organizations don't create that map. And very few companies can connect thought leadership to pipeline and ultimately profitable revenue generation without it. And here's a second one that really is a manifestation of that lack of a customer journey understanding. The stovepipe teams that are operating in their own little worlds have their own little metrics that don't connect. To Cindy's point, it's got to somehow at least get to pipeline stages so that you can see the on-ramp to where revenue's coming from. And if you haven't mapped that journey, that customer journey, then you can't connect thought leadership to pipeline metrics and profitable revenue generation. And if you can't connect thought leadership to pipeline metrics and profitable revenue generation, then the sellers will never completely buy into it. And frankly, unless you're really lucky and you're operating without that map, you're probably not generating revenue from it. And even if your common metric isn't revenue, that's fine. Find one or a small list of metrics, again, ideally pipeline, that at least show the ways to it, to that revenue. Give them a sight line, or that desktop exercise thought bubble is always going to be floating around the seller's head.
So Maria, we obviously all know that, you know, aligning on objectives is critical for thought leadership to succeed. How do you bring closer alignment then between those disparate teams?
I wouldn't go so. I know there are some companies that have already tried to have, you know, revenue as the penultimate, and even have played around with variable comp a little bit. I think that's extreme. I think having a dashboard that is simple and easy to keep updated, that shows no matter, this is the whole process, key metrics or key indicators that will lead to the ultimate profitable revenue, and revenue should be on there. But what are the leading indicators? Pipeline, obvious pipeline metrics are always in there, and maybe some early ones around building awareness and things like that, that all correlate. And I think if you've got that visibility for everyone involved in that journey so that they know which of those numbers they influence and how those numbers connect. Again, it's not hard to do. It's just critical to keep it simple and understandable and digestible. To me, the companies that are able to manage that and give it the visibility and the leadership, the visible vocal leadership to drive it with their teams and the collaboration in the C-suite to do it, they're the ones that win.
Can I just add something to that? Because
of course, please.
I think, you know, we all are coming from fairly large organizations with thought leadership practices, right? But what Maria said is relevant for even smaller organizations and individuals, right, who are thought leaders. Because you're doing thought leadership for a reason. I had a CEO at my last job who said, you know, we don't do thought leadership because we like the sound of it. We do it because it's got a result. It delivers a result, right? So whatever that result is, you need to get it down on paper in a spreadsheet, whatever, and then measure against it. Because even if you're a small, you know, consultancy or an individual thought leader or a, you know, content producer, you're still going to want to determine and prove value for the effort that you're undertaking to make sure that you're doing things in the right way. So I don't want people to, you know, walk away thinking, well, this is only relevant for somebody like an IBM who can measure pipeline. It's not. It's relevant for, you can measure your pipeline. Whatever your pipeline looks like, you can measure it. So you don't need fancy metrics. You don't need, you know, an IBM's resources to do it. You just have to sit down and do it.
I think building on what you're talking about, Cindy, is like there's a need for you, regardless of identifying the various groups that have to play a role in the journey, and actually find a way to get them vested in the outcome, whether they're at the front of the process, the middle of the process, or the back of the process, so that we can all kind of achieve collectively that kind of outcome we've designed to go after for that customer journey. The challenge that I think organizations probably have is that someone's got the idea and someone then has to now market that idea, and they don't necessarily feel as connected to that idea as the person who came up with it. And if you're not finding a way to bring those groups together with the data, with the metrics, with the measurement, and with a clear playbook of how you execute, it can become really challenging to keep everybody moving in the same direction.
Jeff, I think that's one of many reasons why we're seeing an evolution from a chief sales officer and a chief marketing officer to a chief revenue officer to own that whole end-to-end journey that the customer is on, and to break down some of the stovepipes.
You bet. You bet.
So on the subject of outcomes and ways that people are using thought leadership, we'd like to just do a quick audience poll here. So we're wondering if you can give us a sense of how your thought leadership people are most likely to use thought leadership. This is a single choice response. It may be several of these, but the one they're most likely to use. Is it a conversation starter in sales calls or emails? Is it shared on social media, included in proposals and pitch decks, handed out or cited at conferences and events? Or are you not sure that it's being used at all? So if you'd like to share your answers with us there, we'll come back to the results a little later in the webinar. And I wanted to pick up with Jeff again off the back of that. Jeff, I'm wondering what some of the considerations are in making thought leadership more usable for people further down the sales funnel. Is it, format? Is it how you connect to a specific opportunity?
It's a great question. I think it's a combination of things. The asset itself is usually a culmination of a number of ideas plus a tremendous amount of research, all brought into a story. I think that to make this usable for folks downstream, you have to actually think about the component assets that you have and figure out which components are going to actually play well together in order to help that target audience in your adoption pipeline. If it's going to an end client, how do you tailor the data so that it is specific to what they find relevant? If you're thinking about going to a event, how are you thinking about shaping the storyline, the deck, the presentation, the derivative assets, the supporting information that connects the commercial outcomes that you're seeking? How do you tailor those assets in order to make it specific to the event? So I think in a world where we're leaning into and we're surrounded with a lot of the technology necessary to be able to personalize content, we need to make the step, right? That's going to stand out. It's going to allow us to connect the dots between something that we've come up with center or at the core of the organization and make it really relevant for the groups that we're deploying it against. That's going to get salespeople more engaged in it because they know how to connect the dots. It's making it easier for them to adopt it. And it's going to create a greater impact and impression in the client's minds.
Cindy or Maria, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think having that orchestration plan going in is brilliant. And I think a lot of people miss that really important step.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. So getting more into ROI, obviously, Cindy, this is something you've covered recently in your book. Do you think salespeople would be more convinced of that value if they really understood the ROI? And Cindy, maybe you'd like to start with some of the findings from your own research.
Yeah, I do think so. I think ROI is a tricky concept. It's easy to calculate. The math is easy, but the inputs are not so easy to determine. What is it that you're going to measure as your as your expense? What do you include in the expense? And that's where I think it gets a little tricky. So I do think that we're going to become more and more comfortable with calculating ROI, and we calculate it based on several factors in the book. So there's influenced spend and direct spend, and the way that we capture that number is by surveys. We ask people. We ask 4,000 executives what they spend as a result of consuming thought leadership. And by the way, 88% of CEOs around the world consume thought leadership between 2 and 3 hours a week. So if you don't think thought leadership is valuable, you probably already do, or you wouldn't be here. But it's definitely something that CEOs rely on. About 80% of them rely on it to fill gaps in their own organization. So there's an immense value for thought leadership at the executive level, and it's driving purchase decisions. 87% of the executives in our survey said they had made a specific purchase based on a piece of thought leadership that they consumed in the last 90 days. So there's immense value. So salespeople are sometimes convinced by data. They're more often convinced by their own experience, right? And what has worked in the past. So, but I think the more you can get them familiar with using it, you can get them familiar with some of the metrics, and using some of the pipeline, numbers, the calculations that help them be comfortable that it's real, that these outcomes are real, and that it's not somebody making something up to try to make them do something because, as Maria said, they're already really overwhelmed. But again, going back to the calculation, we used this direct and influence spend that's that we captured based on asking 4,000 executives. Then we have a realized influence spend, because obviously there's a lot of influences that are, that CEOs are taking into account, or that executives are taking into account. And in most cases, marketers will use like a 5% realization factor, right? The assist factor. So then we look at mind share. How much of the mind share in your population does your particular thought leadership have? And we know that executives typically consume thought leadership from 5 trusted producers. And we know that because they told us, we asked them whose thought leadership they trust, and they gave us 5 names. It's not the same 5 names for everyone, but generally they could give you 5 names of organizations whose thought leadership they use. Then we look at the reach, what percentage of clients in your population can you reach? Turns out that's about 30% based on a random sample. Then you have to figure out what your profitability or your revenue number is, and then you do the math, right? And the ROI on thought leadership in general, based on large organizations with 200 clients and a 10% profitability rate, is around 156%. That's not nothing. That's a pretty substantial ROI, and it's a credible number to start with. The book has a kind of a calculator in it, so everybody can use the spreadsheet to put their own numbers in, calculate their own ROI, set a baseline, and see where they go from there. So it's one way to help sales teams and account teams understand the value. The comparison to pipe is the other. There are benchmarking capabilities that are out there that can help an organization or an individual understand the impact that their thought leadership is having. But again, I think the more that you can get evidence, because for 60, Lucia, our colleague from McKinsey, will tell you for 60 years, and even before they launched their McKinsey Quarterly, they fundamentally believed that thought leadership was the way they built their business. It was their marketing program, right? They don't advertise, they use thought leadership. So it's intuitively valuable. But the more concrete evidence you have, the easier it is for salespeople and for account teams to make it part of their normal kind of go-to-market approach, because back to what Maria said, they're completely overwhelmed, right? So if you can make it easy for them, that's what's going to help them value it and use it.
And to add
Go
what
ahead,
Cindy,
Maria.
I really believe, not every company, I rattle off things like mapping customer journeys and building that out. It doesn't take weeks, but it does take time. And I'm sure there's people sitting out there saying, I don't have the staff for that, even if it is fast. I'm not sure where to start. Here's something we do a lot on the sales side when we generate commercial insight to try and compel a buyer or a client to swing our way. The whole idea of evaluating what they're missing right now, what they don't understand about their business and really should, is at the root of how the best salespeople sell, and it works with them too. So maybe you don't today have a valuation of the impact on pipeline metrics or the impact on profitable revenue, But what you can say with great credibility is leveraging Cindy and the incredible work done at IBM to tell a seller or anybody in your organization to say, the ROI on thought leadership for a company about our size and about our, industry stature is 156%. Let's hypothetically say that, yes, we are different and we are special. Let's say it's only a quarter of that. It's still a lot of money. And it's a way to start your journey to bring people along so that they'll do the work to get the valuation quickly. But having being able to cite the work IBM has done, at least in the circles I've run in where there's a lot of resistance, has been incredibly powerful.
Jeff, I'm wondering how easy it is to identify which thought leadership content has helped and at which stage. Is that something that you've been looking at KPMG as well?
Yeah, no, I think it's a thing that we're always trying to better understand as you look at the sales pipes of our organizations. Some organizations are structured around really, I would say, focused, defined account strategies with very structured sales teams. Others use like most big four firms have a lot of partners who all have individual perspectives around how they interpret the data, want to build in the data, think about using it as part of their story or not. And what I'd say is that we like to find out, we have pretty good information kind of around how people are engaging with it externally and coming in, because that's obviously data that's very available to us. I'd say that we are still always trying to unpack the best use cases of thought leadership in specific client engagement opportunities, and something that you never know how it's feeding into the mix of the conversation because you're not in the room, obviously. But we do see that those partners who do leverage it and lean into the stories and lean into the data tend to have a more credible outcome, and they frankly improve their outcomes when they're doing it. But it's not something we have clear measurement on across the system. So something we're working to get into the model more and more articulately, but an area of growth still for us as we continue to advance kind of our whole approach to how we take this to market.
We have a couple of questions that have come in, actually, that I'd like to bring into the conversation. One of which is about the marketing sales divide being due to salespeople only brought in kind of at the very end of the process. And I think all of us have spoken about that element of ownership that perhaps sales teams feel that they're missing, and just being told, at the very end of it, just use this material, they haven't been there for the ideation or the development or anything else. And the question is whether this is a particularly big issue in companies where salespeople, I imagine largely consultants, are experts who see themselves as rainmakers and perhaps don't want to be told so much what they should be taking out to the market.
I'll jump in
and start that. Please, yeah.
Absolutely. I'll start that conversation by saying we are a persnickety bunch, because not only do we not want to be told what to bring out. If you were to reach out to salespeople and say, hey, you're an influencer in your organization, we'd like you to be a part of the build, or we want to beta test this off, you'll hear, well, I don't have time for that because I'm busy with my customers. So I think this is an opportunity for those who have the privilege of leadership to make sure that they are brought in at the right time early and have a part of the content development or sharpening or at some stage before it hits prime time. And that there is a very careful curation of when and where you bring them in, because it is the most impactful time. So I think it's a combination. There's no question you need to find the right influencers within the sales organization and get them involved early so that you have a little bit of their brand value that you can use with the other sellers. And you've got a C-suite officer or a collection of C-suite officers that are in their ear saying, this is important, and this is why I want you to be the one that does it.
This presumably is really helpful, of course, to have those insights from the people on the front line, because they're the ones talking to the clients about what specific challenges may be.
And they're the ones talking to the other sellers saying how much it helped them or didn't. I think it's a great question. I appreciate Bob raising it.
Yeah, we try to leverage FOMO a lot which is, the minute that a report goes out or a piece of thought leadership goes out that is getting a lot of attention, and our sales teams or account, folks or product folks in the market see that somebody's getting a lot of attention for it, they want to figure out how to get that attention too. So, and it's getting easier. It's not, we haven't quite gotten there yet, but it's getting a little bit easier with AI to help people craft their own point of view using a kind of a core study as the foundation, giving them the opportunity to build a derivative based on what they know about their clients or their market or their product or their region. We can do that through blogs. We can do that through LinkedIn articles. We can do that through, multiple different ways. But I think success breeds success. So again, if somebody in the team is an author on a piece and they're getting in to see clients that they couldn't get into, and what did the LinkedIn research recently said, only 5% of your buying audience is ready to purchase at any one time. So there's a big gap with that 95% that aren't willing to sign a check, but you need to stay in front of them. You need to keep your organization, your product in the consideration set, right? And thought leadership is the way that they can do that. So if we can, again, make it easier for them to craft their own point of view or participate in the production of the point of view, that just helps them keep themselves and the organization in front of the client, so that when they're ready to sign a check, make a purchase, that we're there in that consideration set.
I think that ties in with another question we've just had through, actually, Cindy, which is, research is often cutting edge, and sometimes sales teams struggle to get comfortable with the content and know how to tailor it to the personalization for clients. How do you get sales executives comfortable with the story, not just the research, but I guess the narrative as well of what you're trying to get across in the market?
Yeah, the way that we typically do it is by a couple of ways. We're endeavoring to automate that process by having a 10 or 12 question survey that we would use with the people who want to be point of view authors. So again, using a kind of, let's talk about this CEO study that we just launched. That is the basis report. The data is the foundation for the point of view. Asking a seller or a product marketer, what is it that you want to say? How does this tie into the perspective that you want to bring forward? And that sort of helps them engage with the content. I also, when I talk to our account teams, I tell them that producing thought leadership isn't the beginning of the process. They need to read before they jump into actually producing. So, because what we hear a lot of people say is, "Oh, I want to write something. I want to write something about something," right? And so we say, "Well, what is your point of view on it? What do you want to say?" And they're like, "Well, I don't know. Can't you put that together for me?" It's like, no. What I need you to do is go read these 3 things, go do a, AI search on whatever, go find some information, think through what it is that you want to say, and then we can sit with you and build a point of view. And it does require, to Maria's point, they're like, "Oh no, I don't have time. I've got to be with my clients." It does require some commitment. But again, then if you've got your pipeline, if you've got your ROI, if you've got your evidence on the other end, you can say, you commit, 10 hours of prep, 3 hours of prep, 10 minutes of prep, whatever it is, you're going to get this level of return and be able to be in front of your customers in a way that you haven't been, or in a way that you've wanted to be before. So a little bit of it is trial and error. You have to figure out what's going to work in your organization and with your selling teams, and, leverage people who have been successful. Because again, FOMO is a really powerful force.
I think there's
Do you see that? Oh, sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think we shouldn't underestimate the value of training in this context as well. Like at the end of the day, we're not training our people, we're not bringing them the stories, we're not helping them. We have a big massive release, like why wouldn't we host a webinar for internal consumption to help the sales teams understand how to get the best value out of it, to walk them through the toolkit, to get them through the materials, to make it kind of paint by numbers. We've heard a lot, make it easy for sales teams as much as we have through the conversation. I think Cindy's points are all right. How do we get them to build on it so they can personalize it and they can feel like they can own it? Because if they're not going to own it, they're not going to take it, right? Or else, because if they feel like they can actually wing it better than they can own something they don't understand. And so I would encourage us and people here to think about different ways that you can cause the teams to become a part of the asset in one way, shape, or form, or have it become a part of them. So then they take it forward.
I think
That's exposure, that's content, that's resources, that's the whole bit, whole kit.
I totally agree, Jeff. And I think that ties in nicely with the question that the other Jeffrey Lynch just asked about how to involve your salespeople and kind of customize for the different stages of the sale, because obviously you're not just engaged. Hopefully you're not just engaging a buyer, you're engaging a lot sooner. And I think, to your point, having, whether it's a webinar or a workshop or something else, and making that a working session where you're having sellers bring that particular part of the buying journey where they're trying to have a conversation and talk through, or at least let them go through the mental exercise while they listen to a webinar or whatever, of what's important to this particular entity, what are they getting wrong or not quite right, that this thought leadership could really show them the way. How much is it worth to them, both quantitatively and qualitatively? It's a bit of that challenger commercial insight model, but that customization fed through the piece of thought leadership with the lens of the customer circumstances is a critical step that will always need to be done, regardless of how well done the thought leadership is. It's almost like AI. Very few instances of AI are ready for what I call prime time. You can just send it out. It always needs a human's eyes in them to portray it and to propagate it the right way.
Just picking up on that, there's another comment here about, in terms of credibility with sellers, when there's media coverage, when data and research is pushed out through the media and gets picked up, it helps sellers to feel more comfortable with it and then share it with their network. So I'm wondering, first of all, Maria, if you would agree with that, and to the whole panel, how important then is a PR strategy around the thought leadership pieces that you're producing?
I would certainly agree with that, especially if it's not your company's data. When I was at DuPont, I cited Gartner all the time. When I was at Gartner, I cited Korn Ferry and KPMG and other companies that are experts in the space, even if it was a space competitive to what Gartner was saying. It brings a level of credibility and openness that you're there to help this company make forward progress, not to close your quota gap.
I think good content requires you to push the conversation forward. And sometimes that means you need to borrow from or lean into the conversations that have already been happening in the marketplace on the subject, which means bringing together points of view from some of those market competitors. Now, how you tell a credible story that advances the ball while leveraging that as a stepping stone, I think is a important component of it. It can't be that you're just building content, borrowing everything from everybody else. Where's your new insight? Where's your new perspective? Or else, if you can't create a new point of view, then it's going to be undifferentiated and not going to stand for the marketplace. It's going to be another piece of content floating in your marketing pipeline. So as you think about differentiation and improving quality and being true to the craft of driving the story forward, I just encourage you to think about, like, how do you use it and build on it, so that you can help drive the conversation.
Just coming back to one of the first questions we had, actually, which is around roles in the production and distribution of thought leadership. We have a question about how you draw the boundary between thought leadership producers and marketers on the promotion side. As a producer, it feels like my role often slips into more of the marketing side and it takes me away from creating. Should there be more of a delineation around those roles? Or is it more of a collaborative effort that that would be most successful, do you think? Jeff, do you want to pick up on that one?
Sure. I don't think that you can. We talked earlier about like the process being connected. You can't. Everyone's going to have a different job. Everyone's going to have different skills, and we have to build teams around that different set of skills and capabilities. Collaboration's required, but it's actually required at also at the idea level. Sometimes it's not just that the person downstream is only brought in when it's their turn to take the potato. You know what I mean? Like we have to actually make sure that people are brought in early enough so that they can continue to own it. If if I'm the thought leadership creation person, yeah, you're gonna have ideas around how you'd see execution manifest. If you're a marketer, you might have ideas on how the story should be told. Bringing that together is going to help you kind of, if you can do that in a constructive way, in a positive way, where everyone can kind of lean in, you can get to better ideas and you can get to better outcomes. If you do it in silos, then it creates frustration and it creates a bit of anguish and hostility, and it doesn't support the constant flow of an asset moving in the right way. So I believe strongly in the collaboration model. I do understand that sometimes takes longer, but it is something that drives typically better outcomes.
There's a question
right.
here to.
Sorry, Katharine, can I just add to that?
Of course.
That's right, Jeff. And I would add that I think when I talk about 50% production and 50% promotion, there's a marketing aspect to a thought leadership producer's work. And by that, I mean, you have to market your work. You're not marketing your organization's products or services, because that's the bright line between thought leadership and marketing, right? Is when it becomes commercial and when you start, talking about your organization's products, services, solutions, promotions, you've clearly crossed over into marketing. But when you're a thought leadership producer, you need to get your thought leadership into the hands of the people we're talking about today, the sellers, the marketers, the account teams. And so there's an element of promoting your work to the people who can then use it in the sales cycle, in the sales pipeline, like what Maria was talking about. So I differentiate very strongly and with a huge gap between thought leadership production and promotion of the thought leadership itself, and using that thought leadership in the marketing of the organization's products and services and solutions, which talks about the commercial aspects of the enterprise and is marketing itself. So that's how we make the distinction in the book and within IBM. There's a firewall between thought leadership, and we don't mention products and services largely in our thought leadership for that very reason, because we want to keep that firewall between commercial aspects and between the relationship development and the top end of that sales funnel.
There was actually a follow-up question to a point that you made earlier, Cindy, about personalization and giving salespeople AI as a tool, for instance, to tailor a perspective. Is it the case that you're saying that part of marketing's job is to help salespeople be seen as thought leaders, not just, the authors of the report?
Yeah, I think it depends on whether that's how they want to position themselves. Yes, I think in the broadest sense, yes, I think somebody who's interested in using thought leadership to build their relationships with clients is by necessity going to become a thought leader, because they're going to have to use the thought leadership, and the data and the perspectives and build a point of view. So from a client's perspective, if you're getting information and you're getting insight from one of your salespeople, wherever it's from, that's one of the 5, organizations whose thought leadership, whose content you trust, then that person does become a thought leader. So, do we go into it with that as a goal? I would say no, but is that a usual or a typical outcome? More common than not.
So I think this might be a good time to bring our poll back actually and see what kind of results we have, what people have selected. So it's looking like a tie at the moment. as a conversation starter in sales calls and emails, and included in proposals and pitch decks. Slightly below that, shared on social media, but not a lot of people, only 5% at the moment, saying it's handed out at conferences and events, and only 10% actually saying it's not being used at all. Just get a sense from the panel of what your thoughts are on that. Any surprises there? And please also comment in the chat as well on your reaction to that.
My first reaction is there's a big chasm between a conversation starter and a pitch deck. So obviously it'd be great to have partnership of what happens in between as you progress down the funnel.
Cindy or Jeff, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that so few, well, it looks like one person thought that it was that their sales teams are most likely to use it as at a conference. That I would say that's most of where we get, to the question. I think Jen asked the question about media. That's where we get a lot of the media, is because the thought leadership is used at events. We try to align all of our major thought leadership report launches with a major industry event, because it makes it easy for our marketers. It makes it easy for our sellers, again, to have that content as the platform, as the foundation for what to talk about. It's easy to then follow up with people that they meet at the conference with the content. That I think that might be a missed opportunity there. That one surprised me.
Okay. I just want to come to, throughout the conversation, we've been talking about what could drive more success, what could bring sales teams and thought leaders closer together, or thought leadership producers. I'm wondering from each of you what one thing might help drive more shared responsibility for the success of a thought leadership program. Is it connecting thought leadership to business strategy? Is it the ownership piece? Is it looking at the quick wins as well as the long game? What would you say on that, Jeff?
I think it comes back to being able to show the data and having leadership come to the business aligned with the importance of the content, of taking the content to the market, and to being able to get our teams skilled at leveraging that content. Ultimately, the data will pave the path for leadership buy-in, which will then create the urgency necessary for the rest of the organization to adopt. But if you don't do the follow-through stuff later down, I think it's going to be a really tricky challenge to actually sustain the energy necessary for this to actually manifest into results over time.
Cindy?
Yeah, I think it's really around activating that virtuous cycle, and making salespeople are accustomed to figuring out what their clients, what their accounts need to keep them top of mind. We need to do the same thing with our sales teams, right? So it's like turn the tables, become the salesperson and sell the thought leadership into your sales team in a way that they would turn around and then sell your products and services to your clients. So make it easy for them to use it, to make the decision to buy it in essence, right?
Is that maybe, I know Jeff, you were speaking about training earlier, is that maybe an opportunity for workshops, for instance, where there could be role playing, sales people could be involved in advising thought leaders on how?
Yeah, when you're using the training sessions on how to use content within your own organization, what better way than to have successful salespeople who leverage content on a regular basis come and tell their stories of how they win, right? It feels like a good opportunity to not have it coming from the horse's mouth all the time, but have it coming from like the people who are actually in the field making it happen, and showing how it's opening up more opportunities for them and making them more successful.
Does that resonate with you as well, Maria?
Completely. I think what both Cindy and Jeff raised resonates with me. And I think I would summarize it as, I'm going to go back to common metrics that map across the revenue engine, well upstream of revenue production. from the early indicators to verifiers to pipeline metrics, and yes, to end one. Be sure every person involved in that engine, not just thought leadership and not just sales, but everybody in between, sees that simple collection of common metrics and knows how their work contributed to them. And to do that well, yes, you'll need to understand your customer journey, but aligned journey, orchestrated roles, common metrics, and a vocal, visible leadership team that reinforces it.
And how important is relationship building across those teams and across organizations, you know, where salespeople feel like they may be able to credit or attribute things to their thought leadership team a little more perhaps in conversation, or feel like they can engage early on and say, hey, I've got this idea, you know, can we talk about it?
I think relationship building is sales 101, whether it's an internal sale or an external sale. There just needs to be so much more, the credibility behind the numbers that says, when I engage this organization, my sales drive, I have a faster sales velocity and a better impact and outcome from my client. I'm gonna continue to leverage that because this is a key part of my success.
I think
You can sell drinks at the end, but if that's not there, you're not going to get
them. I think it's really critical in big organizations to continually invest in the relationships internally in order to sale, to connect the dots between where the content is coming from and the nodes across the organization who's taking it to market. The more those relationships are established, the more likely that they trust the source, and therefore more willing they are to commit to using the content one way or the other, right? Like if you don't have a relationship, that content is going to disappear in a large organization. No one's going to see it. But if it does come because it's coming from a trusted message, a trusted source of information, then I think it has higher credibility and warrants probably a higher degree of click through, if you will.
And is that something you've seen within your own organization, Jeff?
Yeah. If you don't know teams, or you're not spending time with the specific groups that they're building content for, then there's just less energy, I find, behind the asset when it gets taken to market.
The other thing you can do is to Jeff's point, to get them engaged is, you know, you get a review board. You know, I mean, there's tons of opportunities for people to participate in ways that they don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time or invest a lot of energy, but just get them, you know, getting them visibility to the content and the process and your team, and to, you know, build the relationships. Ask them to spend an hour reviewing some content for you, or a graphic, or a date, you know, a chart. That's an easy way to kind of solidify some of those relationships on a point, you know, kind of point to point basis.
I think it's
and would you say that's as applicable within a small organization as well?
Sure.
Maria, sorry, were you?
No, I was just going to say, to Cindy and Jeff's points, I think it's a good chance to apply some activity metrics too. Most of what salespeople do from the beginning conversation to the end is tracked, especially in today's hybrid environment where they're not in the field all the time. A lot of this is happening in a chat room or in a teleconference call. The call's not just recorded for quality purposes, it's recorded for coaching purposes. And you can track that, and you can, again, create a compelling reason to sales professionals when it says 80% of the sales organization is already using this, and it's, you know, that percentage is, that population is up, you know, month over month with this piece on sales. They respect that data, and it's pretty easy to track even for small organizations.
Great, thank you. It's been a fantastic conversation with all of our panelists today. I want to thank Maria and Cindy and Jeff for joining and sharing their insights. I'm sure there'll be many more conversations offline about this topic as well. Those of you who watch GTLI webinars regularly will know there'll be another one coming up next month, in this case on Tuesday, the 10th of June, with Jeff Pundyke, Managing Director at Deloitte Insights, talking about their thought leadership transformation journey. And to keep up with all of the events, you can stay tuned at apqc.org/events. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys were amazing. What a great topic.
Good job, guys.
Really well done.
Yeah, it was great.
Could listen to you all day.
Same. Do we need to stay on, or are they?
I don't think, well, Catherine's off, or no, Catherine's still on, but everybody else dropped off.
So I think they're going to have to edit this part of out of the post.
Yeah, still recording.
Catherine, thank you for
Recording, but I
moderating.
think
that so
Nikki-
For
good.
moderating, good session.
Really well done. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, it was great to have you all on.
Not
The
even-
global confab.
Great.
Take
Cindy,
Talk
get
to you
to that.
soon.
Jeff, nice job. Thank you.
Nice meeting you guys.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.